The Third Side of the Coin, brought to you by XCaliber Coaching and Consulting.
Hello, and welcome to the Third Side of the Coin podcast, episode 8, Leading in the Remote Environment. My name is Aberle, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Tim Wong. I'm the president of XCaliber Coaching and Consulting, a leadership and career coaching firm that partners with current and aspiring leaders going through career transition and looking to find ways to build a world of better leadership. My co-host Tim Wong is a content curator focusing on thought leadership for YPO and defining learning themes for programming globally relevant top leadership learning events. He's also an international faculty of the Art of Living Foundation and the International Association of Human Values. Hello, Tim. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Alex, it's good to be back. How have you been?
I've been doing very well. Thank you so much. Now, most companies had to switch to working completely remotely since COVID-19 hit the world. And unfortunately, some leaders are learning that remote work doesn't really work for them that great. And I just read an article not too long ago on LinkedIn where some of the leaders citing that projects take longer, collaboration is harder, and training new workers is becoming a struggle. And personally, I have worked in the remote and global environments for the last, I think 15 years. And I can see that there could be disadvantages in operating remotely when leaders aren't trained to manage teams with trust and consistency. And even for those companies that were offering a remote environment, I think it's becoming even more challenges because the new elements of remoteness are being surfaced. So when I used to work for the organizations like BT or YPO, even though we worked from home, but we still had opportunities to go to the events, meet with our customers in person. And now all this is poof gone. We have to completely adjust to the new environment. So since you're also not a newbie to working remotely, talk to me about the challenges that you see leaders facing in your world.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of assumptions made about going from in-person to virtual live. And problems arising I'm seeing is, we've always talked about work-life balance. It's sort of shifted now towards work-life engagement. So how are we now engaging our work and life? Because there is no balance, simply because we are unable to have the luxury of having that boundaries that we used to set by going to a physical office or going to somewhere and then coming back to work. And even for, in our experience when we're working, or I'm still with YPO in terms of a remote location, we thought, we're so experienced in this, it's going to be a cinch. But what we are now starting to realize is that even working remotely, every quarter or every year or every so often, you still have that opportunity to meet your colleagues and engage with them and talk. That's where I think ideas or collaboration can never be replaced, because you're able to read the room, you're able to read the energy of people. There's something palatable when you're meeting someone. What remote does is there's dissonance, so incongruity in the way we engage each other. So I'm missing the environment, the sounds that adds to our engagement when we're meeting in person, the environment that we're in. Now it's a two-dimensional screen where, it's just a background and me talking like what we're doing right now. So there's a lot of external factors that either overloading our senses or on the other side, dulling our senses. So that motivation to work, that motivation to deliver may not be as intense as what it might have been where we might be meeting someone in person.
And you and I talked before we started recording this podcast that by nature, humans are social creatures, and what makes us social creatures is exactly what you're talking about, being able to be present in each other's energy. And you're right, us meeting weekly, even for those podcasts, even though it's great and it's better than not seeing, each other or our colleagues, it's definitely not the same. The intensity is not the same unless you already had previous relationships, some type of trust, if you will. So I think for me, trust and consistency in communication is going to be key to successfully leading the remote team. I believe that it's imperative that a manager learns as much as possible about employees, especially now.
The interesting thing is what we're experiencing now and for the past few years has been what I like to call the crisis of trust. So with the emergence of fake news, the emergence of everyone can be their own broadcasters through social media, and you can say whatever you want out there, literally, it's taken us to a spot where, well, how do I trust people? And, when you talk about trust, it's an emotive thing. It's an emotion is driven by our senses. Now, when we start looking at that way, then, I trust someone because there is a certain alignment in values, and that is all about our senses as well. What we're now having to do on the remote thing is that there is no emotional support on this. And without the lacking of the emotional support, and what is the emotional support? It's like in an office, or when I know that even if we're working remotely, during one part of the year, I will certainly meet you or get to meet you. It does change the complete relationship in many ways. And so when we're now looking at the challenges of remote working, as a leader, how do I keep that authentic engagement on the screen, right? Because it can be taken quite easy in the wrong way, where it's just rhetorical talk, right? Just going through the process of how you're doing, that as a leader. As a person in the team, how do I keep myself motivated? How do I keep myself engaged in the sense that I am pushing myself to the limit because there's no boundaries. And I think that there is no boundaries, even if you have your own office or the luxury of having your own room for your work and you're able to close that off. It's still in the same complex. A lot of people saying to me, I just close my door and then that's it. And I'm just saying, it's still in the same complex. It's 2 feet away. And that, when you start thinking about it, it's like you can't get away. It's just a door. And the only time you close the door in the office is like you just want some quiet time to get your work done. So it's really flipped everything that for office natives, not instead of digital natives, it's a huge adjustment. Especially how many of us have our home set up as an office, both infrastructure, printers, IT support, everything else that we take for granted on an office, heating, even cooling. You're now also with your kids, because if schools are closed, and then your partner, that it's great to have them around, but then 24/7, it does strain the relationship. So there's not only the obligated engagements, which is work. There's also the unplanned for obligations we have, which is family. We don't plan for it, but office, we plan for it. So it's, again, coming to a point of how am I able to disengage so that I can have that space to take care of myself, or self-care. And that is the important thing of remote working, is where does self-care happen? Do you schedule it? And then when you schedule it, is that still self-care, or is that a chore? So say, for example, I schedule a time for me to meet my personal trainer and go to the gym. You could say it's self-care, but for me, I see it as a chore. But I know that the outcome is good for me. Self-care, I prefer to say, is something that I can do at any time, whenever I want, at my leisure. Remote working can create that. But when you start having a flexible schedule, then there's no routine in your work habit.
Yeah, I think I've experienced kind of something very similar originally when I started working in the remote environment. Clearly self-care is important, but it's almost you forget that you need to set the boundaries.
Yeah.
And realistically what happens, and I spoke last year to some of the students of my university where I've graduated from, and they were curious to know what it means to work in the remote environment, and the key is to make sure that not only that you have the space, but you also set certain boundaries. Just like in the in the office environment, it could be quite annoying to get disrupted if, let's say, the coworker who is super chatty comes up to your desk all the time. It disrupts you. But when you're in the office, most people will leave at the assigned time, and of course some people can stay longer, but you're in a way forced to go. When you're working on your own at your home office, even in a designated space, if you don't have video meetings, what happens? You can wake up, wear your pajamas all day, forget to eat, which is part of self-care. You forget to do some essential things because it's easier that way to just get up, check the email, and start working, and then you get sucked in. So I think the leader has to be an example setter. If there are no video meetings during the day, it is important that we emphasize that you want to develop some type of routine. Yes, it's important that you meet the deadlines and accomplish the project, but it certainly is also more important that you rest, that you take care of your health. And I think when you say self-care, those are some of the elements. So sitting in your pajamas all day can get you to the point where you're looking at the time and oops, it's already 11 at night, and you've been plugging away trying to get a certain project done for all these hours and completely forgot to do what essentially your body and mind needs.
Yeah, I think it's love those comments. What's also very interesting is there's cultural differences in this. So like if you look back in Asia, then long office hours beyond your contracted time. So you are expected in office, if the contract is like from 9 to 5, say, you're expected in the office before 8 a.m. and you're not expected to leave until after 8 p.m. or when the boss leaves, or even if the boss leaves early, you're still expected to be there. So it's a very different a mindset where the time you spend in the office is really disproportionate to the time you might have for yourself or for your family. The other thing is really to have a different thinking about what's happening now. And if we start looking at what a work environment was, it was a tribe. So we opted into a tribe, and that tribe accepted us. So we got employed because we met their whatever tribe needs were. And so we became part of the tribe. But when we start working remotely, we're also part of a tribe, which is our family or the clan, right? So there's no separate, you're trying to please several clans or tribes at the same time. So it's pretty much like having all your in-laws together and your parents together at the same time. And you and your spouse will be there going, well, which set do I please? I mean, that is the biggest dilemma in family relationship. Which set of parents do you satisfy? Okay, so you take it to your own personal level. Which set of tribes or clans do I satisfy now? I mean, it's me, but I'm split between two. So it's literally like saying, if you ask, say, a husband having to choose between the wife and the mother, It's a no-win situation. And this is now scaled to a point where work at sometimes was an escape from home, and home was an escape for work. It was an excuse for each other. It was complementary. But now there is no excuse to get away because you can't. So what does that mean about remote working? It was approached as a bridging platform for days when you weren't able to get to work or for bad weather days, but it was temporary. But something that was temporary has now become the new norm. Infrastructurally, mentally, and routine-wise, we're not equipped to deal with it. So what we need to start looking at is what infrastructure needs to go in. I mean, you can't build a new road for yourself in your neighborhood, but you can start looking at what do you need infrastructurally within your home to support your success as a worker, but also to support your success as a family member. The second thing we have to look at is routine. Mm-hmm. So the next thing we need to look at is routine. We had a routine where we had to get the kids to school at a certain time or to catch the bus. I had to prepare certain things in order to get the day done and then get out the house, whatever, or to turn on my screen and start doing things. When all that has merged, what do you do then? So again, routine's being disrupted, and we need to start looking at what is the routine in the new norm, both for me individually, both for me as a family member or team, and then both for me as a team member.
So when you say routine and then you mentioned self-care before, would you make that conscious effort that yes, self-care is a part of that routine?
Yeah. So routine is something that we do consciously, we do at first, and then it becomes a habit. So it becomes unconscious. So that routine has been disrupted now, where we need to start rethinking about what does it mean for me to intentionally start replanning, start rescheduling, and that becomes a habit. So it becomes autopilot. So say, for example, on a particular day, you always go and do your groceries. But now that might have been disrupted, and that's like irritating, or it's just like your whole world is up in there because you're so used to it. And routine is there for a purpose because you're on autopilot, and that for you helps you to do other things or to get things that needs to get done in order to maintain that harmony in your life.
I just kind of want us to maybe switch for a second to the best practices that worked for you and I in the past, in leadership roles or being a part of the remote team. One of the things that I think often in the past, when I joined one of the organizations, people relied on, I'm going to do the air quotes, institutional knowledge. It's actually, yeah, it's great to have institutional knowledge for an individual who holds that knowledge, but it certainly is never great for transferring that knowledge. Now, in the remote environment, it's becoming even more difficult because you need to onboard employees who are newly hired to certain roles very quickly, and you need to get it done remotely. At this point, I think we need to start simplifying the processes. So I think it's time for a lot of companies to realize that institutional knowledge is going to be held by a specific individual who potentially could become redundant as part of your financial kind of plans, because some companies have to make those decisions to reduce workforce because their clientele is not going to be able to pay money. That's just business. I know it sounds a bit cruel, but that's the reality. The only reason the business exists is because the customers pay you money. Whatever the companies are doing, they do need to teach their managers, number one, how to truly, let's say, train, educate, or coach remotely that allows the engagement and relationship building. But the second part is simplifying and documenting the processes that could be given to an employee who can pick up and easily follow that same process.
Institutional knowledge is always such an underestimated value of a business. And getting rid of institutional knowledge is, in other words, adding costs to the future of your business, because you will probably be spending more time to uncovering or rediscovering things that you might have been able to avoid if you kept that institutional knowledge. And that is, that dilemma people are facing is short-term profitability versus the longer-term sensibility. And there needs to be a mind shift in that with leadership. And that is something that people need to take a good and honest hard look at themselves of what are they trying to achieve. Obviously a business needs to be profitable or revenue positive, right? But at the same time, especially what COVID has done now, is to really take a serious look at the profit hunger from the profit motive. So profit motive, every business has that. Profit hunger is when you go beyond that and you're just being driven purely by profit. And that doesn't do any good for anyone. So if we're able to step back and we start looking at the profit motive, then it brings a softer edge to business, right? And that softer edge is needed now because we're going through a structural change. It's not a cycle, it's a structural change. And we don't know, because there'll be some industries that may not exist. And for ones that still exist, it will take maybe up to 5 years for recovery and reconstruction to happen, but there'll be new things coming up. So massive retraining, massive disruption. And all that comes down to, well, if all this behavioral change has been put onto us remotely, and it has, what does that mean in terms of training? What does that mean, as you talked earlier, in coaching? What does that mean in authenticity? And what does that mean in being able to create the trust and create that emotional support on a 12:6 screen?
When we spoke, you told me that now more than ever, people in my profession are going to be needed. So the coach is not a therapist necessarily, but if trained properly, they can create a change. And I've seen it with many of my customers. What I'm observing is actually those funds are being cut out for coaching. And right now, I do agree with you. This is when the leaders who also feel quite alone, because they're working in some cases in isolation. They need to meet the tough goals and make the decisions that sometimes the line manager or the direct manager of that leader can't help them with, because everybody has a job to do, everybody has a certain responsibility. And it's unfortunate that I'm seeing, the fund cutting in the areas of both training and coaching in quite a bit of organizations. With coaching, you're going to have not only the individual approach to a specific leadership development, let's say, or being able to learn how to manage the workforce or lead in the environment that is remote, truly 100% virtual, but also assist those leaders to, with dealing with some sort of mental block, setting or expanding boundaries, because everything has been disrupted, everything.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you raised this, more than ever now, the role of a coach is so important because the emotional networking that happens within an organization is not there anymore. So for the top leader, he or she took for granted the networking support, the emotional networking support that happens within an organization. So from the C-suite, it goes down to the directors level, then they have the manager that reports in, they supervise the team. And there it is an emotional support. So there is the informal coaching that happens if you get a good boss that is able to help you think through the process. It's the thinking process. And as we've seen, diversity and inclusion in ideas and in employment and whatever is good for business because it broadens the perspective and then the opportunities for creativity and innovation to happen. That's without question, it is the benefit. Now, as we begin to work remotely, and we are beginning to work remotely, that emotional support or networking isn't there anymore, right? And you are looking at individuals, and every individual behaves differently, and that's what the coach is there to do. The coach is able to unravel the complexity of the thinking an individual may have that doesn't have the luxury now of having the office time discussion that they used to have. So even now for organization that has traditionally worked remotely, there was a set time, right, where you work remotely. But now with family being involved, it's made it, it's disruptive because it's changed the frequency, right? That's just changing the routine. So who can you talk to then? How can you unravel your thinking? And that's where a coach can step in and help you unravel it. I'll give you an example today. One of my colleagues informally coached me because I said to her, I have to escalate something to you because I think in the longer term, this will involve you. And then she deconstructed all my thinking, and I realized there was one word I didn't think of, and that one word was that this is a pilot program. Because it's a new thing. I was trying it out, and I thought that this is it. We all think like that. This is it. But she was able to help me take a step back and say, you're actually doing a pilot. What does a pilot program mean? And a pilot program means you are gathering the data to see what works and what doesn't. And with that, it was a turnaround in my thinking. I went, yeah, so why am I so stressed up about it? Thinking about, oh my goodness, the downstream thing. She said, what you learn now allows you to then to pivot to then look at the sustainability of the idea.
So you were able to gain a different perspective in coaching and even good leadership. You know, if an individual is able to manage their own, you know, thoughts, which most of us have not mastered that because there are way too many automatic thoughts based on many various factors. Sometimes we could absolutely get, I guess, drowned, if you will, in those thoughts because our experiences, memories, or reactions are clouded by our perspective, our own perspective. And many times, and I see this in my practice, allowing an individual to see another perspective shifts everything. It could shift it in a moment. That's why they sometimes say aha moment. Well, sometimes it takes more than one aha moment to become great at something. Sometimes you need one aha moment, just like the example you described. You did not necessarily see this pilot from the perspective of another person. Now that you were introduced to it and you were open-minded to receive that perspective, you're reducing ultimately stress and you're making yourself more productive. It's quite important. Leaders are going to have to think more deeply about this, about their perspectives.
Yeah. And with that coach, it's like a coach doesn't have any deliverable outcome as a supervisor or manager would have. And that objective guidance is so important, especially now in a remote situation. Otherwise, you just thinking process, because you have no ideas to bounce off other people, unless you want to bounce it off your 2-year-old. They might actually have some wisdom. and so and so and so it is important to have someone where you can trust. We come back to the crisis of trust, to be able to share your ideas and just hear yourself out. Did that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. Hearing yourself out, it's a very healing method to enter the creative state. Because if you're living inside your head, why do people go to coaches or therapists? It all starts with being able to express yourself to someone whom you trust. Before we finish up, Tim, what I wanted to kind of bring up as a general standard, which was applicable before COVID as well as it is now, maybe even more so important right now when leading individuals in the remote environment. I think it's important to show appreciation, respect, and trust. Celebrating small successes, I always recommended that in the past, but I think it's important even right now. You have to celebrate successes because people want to feel that and receive feedback that what they're doing is the right thing. They are supporting the organization, they're supporting the managers, and they're providing good services. I think everybody is striving to do better. So, that's kind of point number one from my perspective. The next point is, the leaders need to make sure that they engage and empower employees to make decisions and bring ideas to the table. Nobody likes to work for micromanagers, and especially right now that the added challenges from the neurological or mental kind of health are added to the day-to-day issues. We need to make sure that any leader really shows that employee is valuable and be there for them if they need assistance. So do not micromanage. Continuous feedback, super important, always have been important, and especially right now. Anything else to add, Tim, to wrap up our conversation?
Yes, and learn to celebrate yourself. We
that's
forget
great.
that.
So what would you celebrate yourself for right now?
I'll reward myself with chocolate ice cream.
Ooh.
Little things. It's like because you're celebrating yourself. You treat I don't even like to use treat yourself because it's sort of like making an exception, but being kinder to yourself. And what does that mean? This was like one of our earlier episodes about self-knowledge and knowing more about yourself. So it forces you to think, wow, that was pretty neat. I should celebrate that and be comfortable with it.
Yep. Being kind to yourself is definitely going to help you as an individual grow. And as a leader, I think it's going to also transfer to your employees, because once you are kind to yourself, you're going to recognize that you are capable to be kind to others. That's the only way to do it.
You got it. You have to start with yourself first.
Absolutely. Well, Tim, thank you so much for being with me. I so am looking forward to our next episode. And if you enjoyed our discussion, please like and comment below. Subscribe to our channel, The Third Side of the Coin, on YouTube. To learn more about executive leadership and career coaching, resume writing, organizational development services, go to XCaliberCoaching.com or connect with us on LinkedIn. Thank you.